Hello, everybody. Poland is leaving the Istanbul Convention, which is a feminist treaty that claims to fight domestic violence. Poland is a very low risk country when it comes to battery against women. So I'm reading out the treaty for you. The previous video was about the preamble. Today I'm reading chapter 1. Chapter 1 is purposes, definitions, equality and non-discrimination. Channel obligations. I don't want you to read the entire text. If you care about the details, you can stop the video here. For example, Article 1, purposes of the convention. Those are very vague descriptions of what they try to intend. The same is true for Article 2, scope of the convention. As I said, these people avoid specifics. And it becomes more relevant in Article 3, and I wanted to read out Section A of it. For the purpose of this convention, violence against women is understood as a violation of human rights and a form of discrimination against women, and shall mean all acts of gender-based violence that result in or are likely to result in physical, sexual, psychological, or economic harm or suffering to women, including threats of such acts, coercion, arbitrary deprivation of liberty, whether occurring in public or in private life. First of all, the problem is defined in a way that it's a catch-all for everything. So we are taking care of psychological harm, economic harm, and any suffering of women. And it's supposedly a matter of concern for the parties that sign the treaty, which are the countries, whether this happens in public or private life. So you see the core definitions of violence, which is battery, assault, and rape, and so forth. They come with a large definition of what is supposed to be fought under this treaty. And what's troublesome for me is that they don't make a distinction between public and private life, because if it's battery, then the private is public. Then obviously the victim has to call on the police. However, if it continues with economic harm and so forth, this is an excuse to look into your personal family life, things that the state should have no business in. And this is also repeated in Section B. Domestic violence shall mean all acts of physical, sexual, psychological, and economic violence that occur within the family or domestic unit or between former or current spouses and partners, blah, blah, blah. The thing is, economic violence is beyond my imagination. I have absolutely no idea what they have in mind, and this is the danger of such a thing in legal texts. And this is just one example. This treaty, they use terms that everybody can fill with some content, but ultimately they want to punish people. That's why it's a legal text, right? They want to agree on something, and if the party does not abide, then some punishment is supposed to be dished out. And if you are defining a crime or any kind of misconduct in a treaty or in an agreement, then we should be specific, right? And economic violence is not specific. And this issue that we are actually talking about, punishments, is highlighted in Article 4, which is about fundamental rights, equality, and non-discrimination, according to the title. But specifically, it's about punishing misconduct in their view. And it says parties shall take the necessary legislative and other measures to promote and protect the right for everyone, particularly women, to live free from violence in both the public and the private sphere. This is just an example of many how our politicians think about lawmaking these days. They agree on a deal behind back doors, and then the parliaments, they are just supposed to nod and flush that through. In a democracy, laws are made by people based on the debate among the people, and it's a bottom-up mechanism. It's not something the elites just decide somehow, and then the parliament has just just to agree to it. Number two is parties condemn all forms of discrimination against women and take without delay the necessary legislative and other measures to prevent it, in particular by embodying in their national constitutions or other appropriate legislation the principle of equality between women and men and ensuring the practical realization of this principle. And this shows how shameless these people are. I have a hard time to kind of convey to anybody how important it is not to treat the Constitution or even the human rights declarations as bundleware. But this is how these people treat these texts. They just notice that the minimal consensus, the social contract, is something that's cherished by most people because it ensures freedom and stability and prosperity in the long run. And if you want to undermine that, you of course throw ever more bullocks stuff into the Constitution. And this is particularly often the case among people from the political left who try to push in something about pets and about I don't know, charity is sometimes a part of a constitution, and it's bundleware. Nobody reads it anymore. Nobody defends it because the texts grow and grow and grow, and everything is basically as important as voting on the ballot box, or your right to speech, or your right to assemble, and these very basic core things that you need to avert tyranny. The Constitution should basically just encapsulate the minimal consensus that allows you to defend yourself against tyranny. And outside of that, everything, and including gay marriage, by the way, everything else should be left to normal, ordinary legislation. But these people think they can command constitutional changes through backdoor deals and also the ordinary legislation to follow. They get the entire democracy mechanism upside down. It continues with prohibiting discrimination against women, including through the use of sanctions. Here we are. Where appropriate, abolishing laws and practices which discriminate against women. So first, they are already out there to punish and to hurt and fight. And then they also kind of say, you're still doing it yourself, stop doing it, and then start punishing and hurting everybody who does what you're still doing right now. The next is the implementation of the provisions of this constitution by the parties. In particular, measures to protect the rights of victims shall be secured without discrimination on any grounds such as sex, gender, race, color, language, religion, political or other opinion, which is something they've taken an exception of, I'm sure, national or social origin, association with a national minority, property, birth, sexual orientation, gender identity, age, state of health, disability, marital status, migrant or refugee status, or other status. And you will see later on they are using this migration stuff to actually fling the door open to open borders politics. For special measures that are necessary to prevent and protect women from gender-based violence shall not be considered discrimination under the terms of the convention. So this is them having it both ways. Of course, they are against discrimination, but of course, measurements that discriminate against men are not discrimination. You find a similar claptrap about white people, how they cannot be the victims of racism and so forth. And I think what they really want is uprest. No matter the excuse, they just want confusion and turmoil. Article 5 is state obligations and due diligence. Number 1 is parties shall refrain from engaging in any act of violence against women and ensure that state authorities, officials, agents, institutions, and other actors acting on behalf of the state act in conformity with this obligation. We have a phrase in German which comes from sociologist Max Weber, which means the monopoly of violence of the state, and it means that a state basically establishes itself always through the means of violence. So there is actually no way a state cannot conduct violence towards its citizens. There is justified violence and unjustified violence. So if a woman decides to take hostage of an innocent person, she might get shot by a policeman. And likewise, if she decides to become a combatant, and then of course they also become subject to violence. We are against undue violence, no matter who is the victim, male or female. And we talk as signatories, Germany, France, and so forth. If the state uses violence, we assume they do it for a just cause. But illegal exceptions to a proper use of violence is a matter of concern, no matter who is the victim. Number 2 is parties shall take the necessary legislative and other measures to exercise due diligence to prevent, investigate, punish, and provide reparations for acts of violence covered by the scope of this convention that are perpetrated by non-state actors. So we are talking now about reparations, and this is giving false incentives for reporting false acts of violence. There's actually a good reason why becoming a victim shouldn't be a business, why we decide to punish the perpetrator first and to not create any incentives why somebody should run through the police with allegations that may not be true. You should not have a material advantage for calling the authorities on anybody. You should do so only for the pursuit of your justice. Article 6, gender-sensitive policies. Parties shall undertake to include a gender perspective in the implementation and evaluation of the impact of the provisions of this convention, and to promote and effectively implement policies of equality between women and men and the empowerment of women. Again, if you don't know any of the phrases and words, if you have somebody in front of you, ask them those specific words, what this particularly person in front of you actually means. And I have no idea what a gender perspective is, and I don't care to find out. I want people who use these alien words and phrases to explain themselves on their own.